Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Lead podcast. My name is Kelly Grogan. I'm here with Matt. Matt, how's it going today?
Things are great. I'm really excited about this conversation. Kelly, was great to see you at the NRA show. I know there was lots of excitement there, but excited to hear how things were and more importantly, jump into this conversation with Mike.
Yeah, I mean, NRA, I'll apologize in advance. I don't think my voice has come back yet. So sorry for everybody's ears, but I know Mike was there too. So hopefully he's ready for this. But super excited today. We've got Mike from California Tortilla here. He is the VP of operations, and he is joining us today with just a wealth of knowledge as well as an amazing history stemming from leading from behind the lines first, right? He's got
Mhm.
amazing hand-on experience and he leverages that to really train, coach, and help all his entire organization succeed today, specifically related to the franchisees. So Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Super excited. Since we met and since we've been working together, my goodness, I've always enjoyed just some of the stories that you've been able to share. But I think the one that really resonates with me the most is just, your hands-on experience. So give us the history, Mike. Where did it start for you? How did you get involved? What was your first job?
No, goodness. Yeah, I mean, yeah, a little bit unique path for me. So my first real job out of college, I was a franchisee. So it was me and my college roommate, he was a fraternity brother of mine. We kind of had that entrepreneurial bug, and within a year out of graduation, I was a franchisee with ExxonMobil of all places. So pretty intense. And the funny thing about that, I tell people is that my balance sheet, the only asset I had at the time was an 11-year-old Corolla that my parents gave me for graduation, so I could kind of get to and from work. So there was a lot of hard work that was put into this, and a lot of networking and being able to write a good business plan and being able to borrow money from investors and people that we knew because that there's no bank that's going to loan money to a kid that's got a 11-year-old Corolla, right? So we got into the franchise bit, and I'll tell you, I mean, I think it's a very formidable piece of my leadership style because here I am, at the time, we were the youngest franchisees in the state of Maryland for Exxon. So, two 24-year-old kids that's going at it. And you kind of had to learn on the way, right? We had to learn on the fly, figure things out. And there was this, probably I would say one thing that I learned about myself is how to overcome fear because that's a big part of it. You're every day you're kind of concerned, how do I pay the notes? How do I pay my investors? I don't want to fail my partner. I want to be successful. So that was a huge part of it. But the other thing is motivation. I mean, fear is a big motivator. And also money, of course, is a big motivator. So I say every time a dollar came across the counter, it was like a big dopamine hit. So every time, more and more dollars come across and you go, how do I get more of this? How do I make more of this? How do I drive my sales? And in that early part, I mean, it was most Exxon, at least convenience stores that I knew of, my lease was 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So you never closed your door. So my business partner, Todd, he'd work the first 8 hours behind the register. I would come in, I'd work the second 8 hours. And then you get off and do your admin stuff or clean the lot or whatever you had to do. And then we had a night guy that would come in. So we did that for, at least the first year and a half, just to make sure we had enough money. So it was about rolling up your sleeve, getting the work done, being motivated. And we did so many marketing things that I think people were just like, what are those guys doing over there at the gas station? They're always doing something crazy. We're out there. I remember one time I got in a Barney suit and I was giving away flowers for Valentine's Day to every patron that came in. And this was supported by Exxon, of course. But I was like, you got a Barney suit? Put me in there. So a lot about having fun, overcoming that fear, being motivated, and growing. And then we had another opportunity come across a couple years later to be franchisees with the coffee beanery. So we were doing that. So kind of split our time, and we would go back and forth. But that was really kind of the formidable years of my leadership and entrepreneurial spirit.
Can with that, I mean, fear is such a great aspect of that. Did you Did anybody help you along the way? Did you turn to somebody? Was there somebody that was a mentor for you during that time that helped guide that? I mean, or was the Barney suit only your idea?
Well, Exxon has got a great operational platform, so they're not going to let you fail. So I think that's part of one of the reasons why somebody like myself and my business partner could go into that, because they said, like, follow these systems, follow these rules. We have a great support network. We have great franchise consultants. Follow the system, and I bought into that heavily. I mean, I was like, I am going to follow this to a T. I want to be successful. And then, yeah, I had other mentors, and really where kind of I learned my leadership, piece from, and then kind of developed that from there.
That's amazing. And so when you think about, that experience and everything that you went through, you were left with sort of this toolbox. How does that shape how you work with your franchisees today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think, yeah, and it's there's two pieces, right? There's how do I work with the franchisees, but also how do I develop my team? Because I don't expect that my team is going to have that same experience as I do. I can relate very well to the franchise community, because I think a lot of what they say is, or can say is, well, you don't know what it's like. And I can say, no, I know what it's like. And I've had that fear. I understand, that, your mortgage could be on the line, or relationships could be on the line. And I understand that. And I want them to be successful. I empathize with that. And we also have other people that are, they might own, a suite of businesses outside of this, but they still need to be successful. So understanding what motivates a franchisee, but also, for after I sold my businesses, I worked in the franchise world for the better part of a decade, and I went into restaurants on the corporate side, and kind of learned that side of it too, and understand how do I use those two pieces? How do I understand the corporate structure, but also that franchise mentality to drive results? But it really comes back to understanding people and what motivates them, and what motivates franchisees. Bottom line is money. I mean, anybody that comes into a franchise, they want one thing. They want, whether it's extra or more, or, they want to open up more restaurants. It's about profit. It's about money. But how do you get there? And that's the roadmap that I think that I can provide for them, but also that I teach my team, whether it's franchise consultants or my director of operations. But what's that roadmap look like? How do you get them there?
I think that's such an important component of it because it's so easy to miss sort of the financial side of it, and for some, well, they want more money, they may not understand the true financials of it, and Mike, you're highly skilled in being able to dial it down to the simplest way. Um, when working with your franchisees, obviously they have to do the work at the end of the day. You can't run the business for them; they have to do it. Can you give us an example of how you were able to roll up your sleeves and work with them directly to understand the financial side while still supporting them and getting them to see it?
Yeah, and I'll give you a couple examples. I mean, I think so. I think when anytime you get, there, like you have a leadership platform or theory, right? So you have theory, and how do you take that theory and extrapolate that into real life, right? So there's a book that my father gave me years ago, even back in the Exxon days. It's called Leadership Challenge by Kuzi and Posner. And there was five platforms of that, or five parts of that. And the first part is model the way. Very easy, right? And we all talk about, hey, I lead by example, but what does that really mean? How do you model the way? And that's the way you do it too. Also can earn trust from that team. So one of the things I like to use this example. This is the owner of California Tortilla, Keith. So whenever we open one of our restaurants, and this was the first restaurant I opened with Keith, it was 8 years ago when I started. It was in Wichita, and I have the team, and I'm in charge of the team, and I've got a role in it. I'm overseeing the whole piece, and I got the franchisees there. And Keith comes down a few days early, and when we start training, he gets behind the grill. Now Keith is the culinary master. He's developed all the menus, and that's kind of a big part of his role, okay, in the organization. So after 3 or 4 days, we're about ready. We got another day or two to open up, and he kind of walks out, kind of gives me the salute. Everything looks good, Mike. I'll be back for the grand opening. So I turned to the grill guys that are back there, and I said, "Hey, how was it working with Keith?" "Oh, wow, he's really good. He's really a great trainer. Is he one of your corporate trainers?" No, he's the owner. And it was almost like they were frozen. They're like, "Wait a minute, we were with the owner for the last that." And he's a very humble guy. You've met him. I mean, he comes in with his polo and jeans just like the rest of us. Doesn't say who he is. He just says, "I am passionate about this process. Here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to train you because that's the job right now." Now, the franchisee sees that, all the other trainers see that, and he does that every opening, and it's really inspiring for the rest of us. To say, "Wow, that's really how you get trust," and everybody is really at that level for the passion of the brand. And even when it comes to that financial piece, is sitting down, and I'll use a financial example here. I have a new franchisee that purchased a location, and it's a relatively new location, and they got their P&Ls for the first month they were there, and they weren't good. Okay, so they were losing money, and it was a very difficult conversation. I mean, she was in tears, right? And Mike, what do I do? I thought I understood business, and here I am, and so I scrubbed it, and we went through a much deeper dive, and I like doing that. I kind of geek out on data, but it's only what I feel like the other side can really take that journey with me. So we looked at their third party platforms and their catering platforms, and one of the things I do when I talk about geeking out of data, I segment my business into four different areas. So I don't look at just comp sales as a business, because I think that kind of disguises good things and bad things. So I look at comp sales for four wall business almost as a separate P&L. I look at comp sales for catering as almost as a separate P&L. And I look at comp sales as third party, because you can really tell a lot more. Now, that's something that most franchisees, newer franchisees, have no idea about. And once we dug into that, it was very obvious that the former owner was spending a ton of money on third party marketing, and to the point where they were just buying sales. So their sales were up there, their sales looked good. They were probably in the top 10% of my brands in sales, but it was like didn't make sense. So once we kind of took all that out, and really dug into what the issues were, and said, "Look, here's my guidance. This is how I want you to take the strategy of catering of third party sales, right?" So it took a lot of trust, right? So she did trust me. And what happened over the next couple months was really interesting. One, sales came down, right? And so there was a little bit of freak out there, right? But that was to be expected, because we're no longer buying sales. So I'll use a very specific example. So DoorDash was at 18,000 the previous month, 18,000 in sales. The month that we were comparing against was $6,000. So most people would say, "I'm done. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm freaking out." Well, she made more money on the $6,000. It was all profit. And then she looked at her final statement when the accounting came out, and she made money. And then there was tears of joy. You can see, it's almost like the weight that comes off the shoulders of that franchisee, like, ah, but and we have a great relationship. It's like, "You really helped me figure this out. You really have trained me on, the deeper dive of these numbers that I never would have known before."
I think it's just a brilliant way to approach it, and anybody listening can go through that exercise, or reach out to Mike, or especially Kelly, for questions separating your catering P&L from your four wall P&L from your third party P&L. I've taken experienced franchisees through that exercise, and not all dollars are profitable. I think
Right.
it's a great education process, and not all dollars are
100%.
equal inside of a business. And that for me was just another aha from a conversation I had
Yeah.
with an experienced group of franchisees last week. One thing I'd love to, I apologize if that was a bit of a curveball, but one thing I think is really unique to this conversation is sharing with the emerging leader that being a franchisee is an option for them. So what we want is people to find our industry and love our industry and stay in our industry.
Right.
I was a franchisee for 18 years.
Wow.
And I led the franchisor company for 5 years. If I was successful or not, that's a different conversation, but it's how I became an entrepreneur. But what would you say to the emerging leader, just to be curious about, possibility of approaching a franchise system or opportunity if they're looking for that next step in their career?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I have a lot of those conversations as we have discovery days, and we have franchisees coming in. And in fact, we have two new franchisees coming on right now. And one group is very young. I mean, they're under 30 years old. Their family and their group owns a couple other concepts, but this is their first restaurant concept. So it was really a great uh, conversation piece to go through those discovery days. So just and I'm sure a lot of organizations are the same way. Is we have a day where a potential franchisee will come in, and it's about an 8-hour day, and we do other things besides tour restaurants. We really get to know each other, but understand those questions from a potential franchisee, no matter what their experience level is, and making sure it's the right fit, making sure they understand, here are the pros and the cons of being in a franchise system. And because we want to make sure it's a right fit. I mean, there's nothing worse than, I think, having somebody that comes into any organization, any franchise system, that's not a fit and they're not successful. So we really want to make sure there's a high level of success. But getting back to the question, I think that individual is doing a lot of work ahead of time to understand the right culture, the right brand, the right profitability. And one of the things we even do in these discovery days is we'll kind of put the question out there, like, what other concepts have you looked at? What's the profit margin you're looking for? What do you like about our product versus other products? I mean, I could sell you on my product. I could tell you that we have the best burritos and bowls, and we have the best design team, and we have the best support. But I also want to make sure that they've done their homework. I even harken back to, yeah, I'll, this will show my age a little bit, but back when I started the Exxon, there was no Google. But what me and my partner did, my business partner, we got one of these huge books. There is like an encyclopedia on the 3,000 businesses you could franchise. Yeah. So we just went through page by page: dry cleaners, bagel shops, lawn maintenance. And could we do this? Could we do that? Could we do? And it was really about doing the homework. And when once we got in front of the board at Exxon, I mean, Discovery Day at Exxon was pretty intense. We had done all that homework, so I think they were pretty impressed and say, okay, tell us about, do you understand what a pool margin is? Do you understand, cost of goods? Do you understand turnover rates? Do you understand facility maintenance? And when you could say, and some of it is, I don't have that technical experience just because I've not lived that, but I understand. And here's the homework I have done to support that. So I think as long as somebody's done that homework and they understand, they've looked at the competitive set, that's what I think is the big the big thing that somebody needs to do that's coming into a franchise system.
And I think, Kelly, before I pass it back to you, just an opportunity for any leader at any point of their career to be curious a little bit longer. Do you stay on your corporate track? Do you look at franchise system as an opportunity? Do you learn from a franchise system if you're brave enough to do your own entrepreneurial journey? But there is so much safety in the right system if it's a good cultural fit. And I encourage you to be curious and reach out and sit through a discovery day. Obviously, you want to be careful with their time and go through the vetting process if you make it to that stage. But I still remember bringing dozens of people through discovery days, and some of them found a different home for their the next chapter of their journey, which was right for them. And some joined up. And they're dear friends to today, and it wasn't perfect. It's an imperfect journey. It's entrepreneurship, but it was a lot of fun. So, Kelly, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. I think something that I really heard when you were talking about coaching the franchisees is just the guidance, the education on it. And I think there's sometimes a disconnect between the franchisee and the teams that are inside of the restaurants potentially executing on those different initiatives of getting the orders out accurately or paying attention to serving size or using the right packaging or even just the guest experience. And when you think about coaching franchisees to sort of deliver that message to their teams, how do you train them to get their teams to trust them or to believe in them, or to follow that same sort of a mission? And I'm recalling it, I think I'm going to butcher it, but you shared a story where you had a team member, I'm going to say maybe it was Sandra, who just celebrated a major anniversary with you guys of a certain amount of years where you had a pin that was put in place for her. And so recognizing that tenure within teams,
Mhm.
sometimes the disconnect for franchisees wanting to do that. How do you inspire that sort of energy at the franchisee level?
Yeah, so I'll go back to my first restaurant company was called Glory Days Grill, and they had the the kind of a 4-step process of how they manage the business. It was people, operations, sales, and profit, and it has to go in that cadence. And too many times, a franchisee will start on the other end. The conversation is profit. How do I make more money? I need more money, right? So I always start the conversation with people, and whether it's the franchisee or the franchisee's team, even my agendas right now with my director of operations, every week it starts with people. We talk about anniversaries, talk about birthdays, we talk about development. Okay, so with a franchisee, even though sometimes you can get hit with that, the profit and you make more money. I'll always, take a step back, take a breath, and say, okay, let's talk about first your team. Okay. And then, a lot of times I'll work, where I'll send somebody in, side by side with the team to understand the competencies. So the way the cadence works, so you develop your people at a high level. They're going to operate your business at a high level. Sales will increase, and then you manage profit. But if you go to that profit, a lot of times we've seen this a lot of times shortcuts. I'm going to buy off grid. I'm going to go to Costco. I'm going to go to Sam's Club. I'm going to buy a different product because I can save money. I'm going to reduce labor. And so when I come into a restaurant and even my franchise consultants, I'll train them. We use what's called the iceberg analogy. So Jim Sullivan wrote a book called the 7 steps to multi-unit leadership. All right. So it talks about the iceberg analogy. So it's about supporting behavior. So an iceberg, you only see the top 1/3 of it. The bottom 2/3 is what's supporting the iceberg. So the story about the Titanic, if the Titanic would have hit the iceberg straight on, it wouldn't have sunk. But what it did is it tried to move to the side, and the bottom scraped the whole side of the boat and it sank. So there's this 2/3 that you don't see. So, for example, if I come into a restaurant and I'll use the example, I see a dirty table. The issue isn't the dirty table. That's what you can see. The issue is the supporting behaviors or the lack of supporting behaviors that are behind that dirty table. So where was our opening checklist? Oh, it didn't get done. Okay, that's why we're not using going back to my Exxon days. I followed those systems. I mean, I was going to be successful. So you have to trust the system. You have to follow these systems. If I go, hey, look, well, why isn't there somebody just, right now they're supposed to be floating and cleaning the dining room. We have like 3 or 4 tables that are just that have dirt on, nobody can sit on them. I'm trying to save labor. So that's where they're going to the profit. So I cut down from a 5-man team to a 4-man team. Well, let's talk about how that behavior relates to profit. And they go, well, I thought I was making more profit by not having that person on. Well, you've got people coming in at the height of the rush and they can't sit down. So there's a 3 top right there that just walked out. And that's, if in my concept, average ticket's $22. So we just lost $66, but we saved $17 an hour on labor. So how does that not make sense, right? So and also we wanted to, we have to build business. So then they start going, okay, yeah, all right, you're connecting the dots from what I say people to profit, and then we'll talk about the operations and the sales. So that's that cadence, and it can be a little bit difficult, I think, sometimes for a franchise consultant not to get hit with that. Where's my profit? And you need to guys do better on margins. You need to purchase better. Boom, 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 boom. And then you say, okay, hold on. Let's really kind of look at the 360. Let's look at everything in the restaurant, and let's start with the people, and then go to profit. And I tell you, 9 times out of 9, it works.
I'd love to dive in there because it's a conversation and you just covered it. But one of the things, the buzzwords I'm hearing from this year is labor optimization. So if I go to any conference now, it's not how do we cut labor, just you said, how do we optimize labor? Is there anything that you can leave like an aha moment that an emerging leader can think about when they approach cutting versus optimizing to enhance the guest experience and increase average check? What's your view on labor optimization? If there's one thing you could say to that emerging leader to really understand it, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think optimizing labor, you got to be careful what people mean by that. It doesn't mean just I'm gonna use less, or does it mean I'm going to invest in training and this person's going to understand more? How's this? And if the person understands more than it does, it can take something off somebody else's plate to optimize. But I'm careful about just saying, show me your plan of optimization and show me that you're investing in the training, and that will make a lot more sense. That'll make the job easier for the other people around them, and that therefore you could use less labor.
Yeah. No, I love that. Why I asked that question is we're working with a large franchise group and we had to redefine it because it was coming up. They were traveling their leaders to conferences. So they had this term, labor
Hmm.
optimization, what does it mean for us? So I think that's why you see Mike really thoughtful and on the spot said, hey, what does that exactly mean? And what does it look like for us? And what are the elements? And I think it's just a really great conversation for a leadership team looking at what does labor coverage look like, based on your average check, and a good conversation for any team to have in their weekly meeting is what we're trying to
Sure.
spark here. Kelly, I'll turn
Sure.
it over to bring us into the end of our episode here.
Yeah. Well, Mike, when we think about it for, emerging leaders or those that are, frontline in the restaurant or a brand new franchisee, uh, 2 or 3 habits or key words of advice that you would give to those emerging leaders that they should be implementing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think that, and I'll be a little bit specific with this, but always learn, always grow, but you have to be specific on how that happens. So there's an uncomfortability piece that goes along with learning. So the more uncomfortable you are in a situation, usually defines how much you're going to learn. So I'll tell emerging leaders, put yourself in those uncomfortable positions. If someone says, "Hey, who wants to open this new store? Who wants to be on this team?" I do. Hey, who wants to learn about third party maintenance marketing? I do. I even I'll give you an example, two examples. Back in the day, I was when I was with Glory Days Grill, and I kind of worked my way up. I was their director of training, and I had a lot of chefs coming in and kitchen managers, and I kind of had a little bit of this imposter syndrome. Right, I was like, well, I have this background in in retail fuel and coffee, but I don't have the food chops. No pun intended. But I wanted to really kind of be like, hey, I want to get more respect. So I was like, well, how do I do this? So I researched the top culinary school in the DC market. It was this French school called Les Académies de Cuisine. So I recruited my wife and we signed up for the 6 month pastry program. And this is an intense, this is where you go if you want to come out and work in a high end hotel or a starred restaurant. And it was taught by the former pastry chef of the White House. So here we are, we're in this place. And it's like, I asked myself, what am I doing? Why am I here? And I've used that phrase a few times, or many times in my career, and that tells me I'm in the right place because I'm learning, right? So I did this for 6 months, graduated, but and then got the bug and went to 6 months of French technique and 3 months of international cuisine, and that really kind of helped me with my confidence and get over the imposter syndrome. But the point is, I was uncomfortable, okay, and I grew. And using a more recent example is that my our CMO Stacy has given me a couple opportunities over the last year to do some cooking demos live on TV. So I was in DC and Baltimore. Then just past the Cinco, this past Cinco, I was in it was Philadelphia, Baltimore, and I go into these opportunities, same thing. Why am I here? What am I doing? Because that's not me. I mean, it's like, they're counting down and, I'm almost sweating at the time. I'm going, okay, I'll get through this. But, going through that uncomfortability and you going through the fear and then the learning and the growth. So any emerging leader, find those opportunities where you're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And when you ask yourself, why am I here? You're in the right spot because you're going to grow. And that's the only, if you're just like, hey, I'm comfortable. I'm going to sit back and let somebody else take that opportunity. I don't really know how to do that. I'm going to sit back. No, you put yourself in those situations.
Super cool. That have you made any pastries since, or do you have a favorite pastry?
Yeah, a little bit. I always say my wife is a much better cook, so I'll let her do all that. But no, it was fun to actually have that experience.
Super cool. Yes. Well, Mike, this has been amazing. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with us, share some great book recommendations and just your journey. On the lead side of things, we just wrapped up Sizzle and Spin in Chicago. That was great. Matt, you did a great job on the bike. I um I got other things going on. Please do come join us. We've got our next event June 11th in Dallas. Otherwise, Matt, thanks for joining us today. Mike, we appreciate your time. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.